let's talk about your novel.
Yeah.
I love that you set it in the Natural History Museum. I did a book called Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt with the
Hmm.
great cartoonist Joe Sacco. He
I know that
illustrated
book.
50 pages of it.
Yeah.
And we were in southern West Virginia, which is a wasteland. I mean, billion gallon impoundment ponds full of toxic materials.
Hmm.
Cancer is an epidemic. For some reason, gallbladder disease is an epidemic. Um, and and at one point, it's what the rest of the world is going to look like.
Yeah.
It's coming. It's just one of the first sacrifice zones. We're all a sacrifice zone now.
Yeah.
And I remember Joe turning to me and said, "Okay, we're finished, but what about Shakespeare?" And and that your book reminded me of that
Yeah.
moment
Yeah.
because, and that's why I found it so poignant. I mean, it's not just the story of coping in this apocalyptic world that we're all about to enter, but it's about the importance of culture and memory.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think you can probably pick up from the nature of the memoir work that I do, that, as a person who inherits a family story, family lore, family objects from the previous generation very young. Um, we're often handing the baton off to each other before we really have a chance to kind of develop into our adult lives. And I think that sense of it is vital to protect whatever stories we can in the face of great loss is kind of baked into my background, my childhood, my understanding of my role as an adult to tell the stories of the dead, to hold on to the culture of those folks, to make sure that there's a continuance. And because of that, probably, and also because my great aunt was a medievalist and gave me all sorts of books and lectures about the way that medieval monastic life protected the glories of human understanding from the ancient world and from the Islamic world. I grew up with those stories. I felt like this was an incredibly important part of human existence, was that we can't control whether we go through collapses, but what we can do in the face of collapse is make sure that we hold on to the things that are the most precious. And in the collapse of my family, that was our stories, that was these people, these characters um, that I write about in the memoir. And in terms of the novel, it's really about what are people who are curators and archivists and librarians and scientists doing as information that they've spent their lives gathering and protecting begins to be destroyed or collapsed or lost in great crises. In the case of the book, it's obviously a huge storm, but I think it's extremely relevant even in the moment that we're in today, where we're watching, information be pulled off of federal websites and people trying to protect archives as they're being closed. It's vital work, no matter what the collapse is, and it felt important to write about that and to write into the incredible duty that people feel to the future that is part of that gesture of protection.
Well, the world bifurcates. I mean, I saw it in war
Yeah.
between those who protect and nurture and those who extinguish.
Yes.
Really, there's not much middle ground. It reminds me of Emanuel Ringelblum, the great historian in the Warsaw Ghetto,
Mm-hmm.
who, as he realized that the ghetto was going to be liquidated, hired poets and artists. He didn't really like academics, right, because they can't write. And he buried this trove of material about the life that did disappear in the ghetto in big tin cans,
Mm-hmm.
not all of which were found after the war. But one of the things he did, which you do in your memoir, which is why I think it's not your memoir, your novel, which is so great, is that he said, we're not writing a hagiography. We're writing
Right.
existence. We're writing about the prostitutes. We're writing about the black marketeers. We're writing about, and you do that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the novel ends, I think, on a very moving, you know, it's hope, but it's hope grounded in the the darkness around us. It doesn't deny the darkness. I mean, I think that's quite successful what you do. But let's talk a little bit about the logbook, the
Yeah.
museum. But that effort by Ringelblum reminded me of what you were
Yeah.
really trying to do here, because
Yeah.
the you write the museum logbook was to keep understanding alive. That's exactly, and it's why for me Ringelblum is such a historic figure. When I went to Warsaw, it's not even marked. There's no marker, but I went to where they dug up those big cans that had the
Oh.
material.
Oh, that's
But
wonderful.
that's what you're essentially writing about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I felt like it was really important to have a physical object, a piece of material culture that the scientists and the curators who were trying to preserve the collections would use to record the history of the collections, where they were, what was there, and their understanding of them in all its complexity, and also that the main character would also feel a duty to write down her observations and what she understood about the way that the world worked and the way that water and weather worked in that world, because they were saving it for a potential future that they couldn't imagine. As I was writing it, and this is in the book, I got completely obsessed with what happened in the protections of the collections in Leningrad during the siege, and not only in the Hermitage, but also in the archives that were next door. And I actually just heard a fantastic story, which was slightly new to me, at least the details of it, about the first seed bank, which was also in Leningrad at the time and was protected by the folks who were trying to preserve all this different seeds that they wanted to ensure would be there to rebuild the Russian harvest after the war was over. And we have examples of that obviously in the Iraq War, and it's ongoing in Ukraine. Um, and we have its
Gaza,
opposite, where it's not
Gaza,
happening in Gaza,
Gaza,
right?
Gaza
Gaza's
too.
been so much destruction there that there's fewer stories of what's being saved because it's just been targeted. But it's targeted for a reason, and it's targeted for the same reason that you want to save it, which is that. And I love that you said that it's hope, but it's hope that it's grounded. I really feel like the kind of hope that we need in this moment is this really muscular, fierce hope, right? That's like absolutely clear-eyed about what's going on, and refuses to be ground down by the seeming impossibility of preserving the things that we want to preserve.
I just want to read that little passage
Yeah.
about Leningrad. We were like the people in Leningrad, Father said, in the war, the second one, when the Hermitage, a museum bigger than ours even, was left for dead in a dying city, but the curators stayed. There wasn't much left, but in Leningrad, in the siege, in the war, the curators stayed and ate restorer paste to stay alive, and wrapped the dead and laid them in the basement until the thaw, and chipped the ice off the paintings while the siege went on outside. All that mattered was that the art remained. Even if they could have run away across Lake Ladoga into the edges of the taiga forest and hidden with what they knew, they wouldn't have left. They belonged to the art, and the art belonged to them, and it was a sacred duty.
Yeah.
It is a sacred
It
duty.
is a sacred duty. Yeah. And I've met plenty of scientists and curators and historians over the course of researching both of these books that have expressed that exact same duty. I've interviewed a really brilliant right whale researcher who has been watching the cratering of the population of right whales in the North Atlantic, around Maine and Canada. And it's the bearing witness, it's the holding on to information. It's he can identify each of the individual whales in the pod that he studies by the kerasites on their bodies, just by sight. And his information, his connection, is a sacred duty to him, and he describes it that way. And I think that people who feel called to that work of preservation and unity and community protection in the face of what's going on would describe it that way, would talk about it like that.